When the Bough breaks, Rockabye baby. This, I was told, was how my story began. The birth, in that gloomy year of 1933, was hardly a blessed event. Cold, February cold, Haileybury in northern Ontario, a small town perched above the vast pebble shores of Lake Temiskaming, picturesque in summer, but God-forsaken in the icy clutch of a bitter Canadian winter. A plaintive push of wind, snow twisting wildly through empty streets like blowing sheets. 40 below, according to my honest mother. But as my father recalled it later, I would shiver with delight as the temperature dropped 10 degrees with each telling. 50 below, 60 below, as frigid as Antarctica or Siberia or even the desolate North Pole. A storm so fierce that the nursing nuns had to crawl from their residence on hands and knees and wriggle through an igloo-like tunnel to reach the Misericordia Hospital where I was struggling to be born. Delivered in a blizzard, the North howls in me yet, and while light years away from that time and that place, I am still kicked alive by impetuous weather. Amy took sick this afternoon, and I called Dr. Arnold, my father wrote hurriedly in his diary entry for February 3rd. Something had gone wrong, and he took her to the hospital at once. I went over to see her tonight, and the doctor's bringing on labor by dilation. He says he thinks everything will be okay, although there was danger for the baby. Mother had washed blankets by hand that morning and soon after experienced wrenching contractions. What was she thinking, I've often wondered, wrestling with soapy, sodden bedding at that time of year, pushing and straining with her due date only 2 weeks away? Wasn't that why the delivery had been chancy, with the umbilical cord wrapped tightly around my neck, and why Dr. Arnold, the family physician, had needed to use forceps? We have another daughter, my father recorded on Saturday, February 4th. His writing staggers wearily across the page. I called this morning at 9, and they said the baby was born at 4:15 a.m. She weighs 7 pounds, 13 ounces. I had a hectic day with the youngsters. Mother kept Pat, and Mrs. McCracken looked after Brian, while I worked desperately to finish the book. Over to the hospital this afternoon, and Amy is fine, the baby is fine. I got the book out. The book Dad had to finish and send off before he saw me was a new Hardy Boys adventure titled Footprints Under the Window. The sooner it reached the Stratenmeyer Syndicate in New Jersey, the faster he would receive the meager advance, and the McFarlanes were, as usual, broke. So impoverished in those sepia-stained Depression years that sometimes there weren't pennies enough to post manuscripts. I had to struggle through drifts as tall as my hat to reach the hospital, Dad told me, when I was old enough to enjoy his exaggerated version of the birthday story. Carrying your brother, who wasn't yet 2, but heavy as a sack of frozen pickerel. I couldn't see where I was going. I thought the blast would sweep us across the lake to Quebec. There were wolves prowling after us. I couldn't see them following. The snow was too thick, but I could hear them howling. And then he howled spookily, and after a moment, almost breathless. So did I. When did I guess the ghostly creatures had been stirred into the tale to make it more exciting? Not that it mattered. By then I must have heard the chilling wail of timber wolves rising from the bush, and every time Dad told that whopper, I saw silvered shapes with frosted muzzles and slavering red tongues creeping through the storm, and I felt their eerie music rippling along the bumpy keyboard of my spine. Invented or not, they had to be there. Later, Dad would return to the Misericordia, this time taking my older sister to see the new arrival. Women were allowed days then, often a week or more, to recover from childbirth, and my mother was unwell, feeling overwhelmed from my difficult birth and too many visitors. Yet Dad hoped news that a check for $55 from the Star Weekly, arriving that morning just in time to pay the hospital bill, would cheer her. 4-year-old Pat, beautiful and spirited, with vivid turquoise eyes and silken black ringlets, always attracted attention. Nuns, severely gowned in long, heavy habits, smiled and spoke to her as she stamped energetically along the corridors, leaving slushy puddles on the gleaming floor. "But she's yellow," Patty squealed as my mother pulled back the blanket to show her my daffodil cheeks. The room fluttered with lively women, vivacious Aunt Glad, Aunt Wig with her lavish bundle of crimpled hair, and Aunt Elsie, the youngest and gayest of the lovely Arnold girls. Yet when I imagine this crowded scene, I don't see troubled Aunt Daisy. Marred by a fire as a child, she sadly hovers out of sight. "The baby has jaundice," Mother explained, "but she'll get over it soon." I was still anonymous. There seemed no rush about such matters. My sister, born in February 1929, was not named Elaine Patricia until well into April, and my brother, born in August 1931, was informally dubbed Sonny until he was christened Arnold Bryan late in October that year. "When she's older, she'll be your own little darling to play with," Aunt Elsie said, giving her niece an affectionate squeeze. But Patty was not interested in yellow babies or distracting hugs and kisses. "I like mine better." She held out her favorite, a black mammy given to her by Uncle Frank and Aunt Flora. Wearing a checkered apron, white kerchief, and with a red turban bound around a scabrous bald head, the doll had been imported from the United States, where even there it must have been an oddity in an era of potent discrimination. An unhappy incident occurred that afternoon when, as they were leaving the hospital, my father and sister were trapped for some time when the elevator was stuck between floors. Pat never got over her panic, and although claustrophobia is not contagious, she later passed on her terror of closed spaces to me. In his diary that evening, Dad described the weather as the worst snowstorm of the winter. And then in the drafty rented house on Latchford Street, he settled down at his battered Underwood typewriter and began to pound out another short story for Maclean's magazine. At 31, Charles Leslie McFarlane was a speeding locomotive of a writer, using two stubby fingers to strike off miles of clattering wordage a year. But he was also a freelancer without a steady paycheck, a constant source of worry for a married family man. His parents had gone north in 1910 when he was almost 8. His father, John Henry, enticed by an offer to become the principal of Haileybury's impressive new public school. The salary of $1,500 a year was almost twice the modest salary he'd been paid at IMPAIRED in the Ottawa Valley. And with 4 youngsters to rear, my grandmother Rebecca must have welcomed the opportunity just as eagerly as her husband. When the train arrived at the Temiskaming and Northern Ontario, T&NO, railway station with a harsh screech of wheels and explosive bursts of steam, late in August 1910, the McFarlanes stepped into seething, noisy, rough-and-tumble activity. The remote depot in the middle of nowhere was crowded with men, young and old and middle-aged, some arriving and some leaving for shinier prospects in the gold deposits farther up the line near Porcupine, Larder Lake, or beyond. Prospectors burdened with worn pack sacks and wearing slouchy hats, sour flannel shirts, scarlet suspenders, rumpled trousers, and soiled neckerchiefs, mingled with more dignified males, stifling in stiff collars, tight neckties, and sober business attire. Curious dogs sidled among scattered bundles of gear and supplies, skirted around red and green canvas canoes, and sniffed at the dirty boots of strangers as tightly corseted women searched for returning husbands, with bawling babes straining in their arms and excited children bobbing underfoot. There were the usual gawping idlers with soggy, home-rolled cigarettes sagging from their lips, and newsboys energetically peddling the Haileybury, the Cobalt Nugget, and the Sudbury Star. Horses and carts were pulled alongside the platform ready to carry mining engineers and officials, surveyors, lawyers, and speculators, and various scamps, swindlers, gamblers, and opportunists to the bustling hotels. 4 hotels: the Matabanic, Maple Leaf, Vendome, and Attorney. Their crowded bars stocked with pyramids of polished glasses and a rich array of tawny liquor bottles. Cobalt, site of a glittering silver bonanza, was just 5 miles away, But since Ontario law decreed no alcohol could be served within 5 miles of a mining community, wasn't it natural that hospitable Halibarians would offer goodwill and good whiskey, as good neighbors should? "Dear, what's the matter?" John Henry asked, puzzled by his wife's stunned expression as they made their way along the busy main thoroughfare. "It's all mud," she said in amazement. "This is a big, sloppy mud pie of a town, and we are stuck in it like forks." It had gushed rain as the green TNNO railway cars rattled northward through a wet scramble of spruce, poplar, and cedar trees, silvery slashes of birch and murky tamarack swampland, passing mournful gray lakes drowned in tangles of bush. Haileybury was the dreary aftermath, with mud, ankle-deep in the slippery streets, fringing the long, dragging skirts of the women and the filthy, mud-spattered pants of the men. Not the plain, common-sense mud of the rural Ottawa Valley, but another evil species altogether, mud mixed with clay, with a nasty texture and stubborn grip that fastidious Rebecca had never encountered. Obviously, it meant nothing to the 3 older boys wearing neat navy blue sailor suits who had exuberantly leaped right into it, or to baby Graham, chuckling happily in her arms, or to her beaming husband who had been here before to check things out and never mentioned it. Local bystanders took notice, glancing at petite Rebecca's shy, dark eyes, the lustrous brunette hair sweeping above her brow, a becoming straw bonnet cresting the wave. They also observed the boisterous brothers slyly kicking muck at each other, and the tall, dignified schoolmaster, once a scholarly boy, who now still lingered in the classroom after others had grown up and moved on. A stout trustee who had recently met with John Henry came bounding out of the Matabanic, a plump hand thrust out to greet them. "Your house was finished just in time," he assured Rebecca, "and you will have every modern convenience. We spared no expense for your comfort." "It sounds grand," said gentle Rebecca, hoping the amenities would compensate for the shocking rent of $20 a month. But doesn't this seem a bit topsy-turvy?" she commented quietly, after they reached the raw new dwelling on Latchford Street. Inside, as the older boys gleefully galloped from room to room, she gazed at John Henry in bafflement. How odd that the kitchen is at the front, while the main entrance is at the back, overlooking a field with a cow in it. She did not mention that part of the foundation was missing. "But we've a lovely view of the lake." John Henry had signed this lease on a preliminary trip during the rainy summer. "And here's an electric light, although of course we must be frugal." A bare bulb attached to a long cord dangling from the ceiling flickered briefly as he found the switch, then quickly shut it off. "And look, dear, there's running water at the sink." "Thirsty!" shouted 4-year-old Wilmot, tugging at his mother's hand. "But there's only a trickle," Rebecca said when she turned on the tap, "and it's brown, John, and it smells. This water's filthy." "Oh, I'm sure it will clear up with use. We won't be drinking it. This water is contaminated. But there's a well outside that will do for now, and don't forget, we've a dandy indoor toilet." "Gotta go," Frank bellowed urgently. But after being sent to the bathroom on the 2nd floor, he shouted down, "The door's stuck." "It must be swollen from the damp," soothed his father. "Give it a boot, son, but an easy one." There was a splintering sound, a suspenseful silence, then a frantic, noisy splashing. "I guess we have running water upstairs, too." Giggling, Leslie never missed his chance to crack a joke. Baby Graham, the most placid of infants, unexpectedly began to wail. "Give the baby to me," John Henry told his weary wife, "and don't bother your mother while she's rustling up supper," he warned the excited youngsters. "We'll be squared away in no time." Later, when Rebecca found the bottle of painkiller left in a cupboard, her good-natured husband told her why it was there. "The agent said I should take a dose every time I paid the rent," he said, laughing so heartily she had to laugh too. After valises were unpacked, furniture arranged, and carpets laid down over the splintery wooden flooring, Rebecca returned to tending to her husband and children and carrying on with the usual housewifely tasks of cooking, washing, ironing, and cleaning. Frequently, she answered the knocks of kindly neighbors bearing wild blueberry pies, butter tarts oozing sweet, syrupy fillings, and dense yellow layer cakes slathered with frosting. Haleberry, she told the boys warmly, is a very welcoming place. The newly hired school principal had already toured the fine brick building with the fancy cupola, declaring it was the most beautiful school he'd ever seen. After the term began, he told Rebecca he was delighted with the staff and praised his young pupils as being the smartest, healthiest, and most polite youngsters he had ever been engaged with. He even got along with the prying inspectors who came routinely to review his methods. John Henry McFarlane was a man often and easily pleased. Spending the winter in a house without insulation, storm windows, or a workable furnace was like inhabiting an igloo. But even before they moved to a more comfortable residence, the McFarlanes had found a permanent home in Temiskaming. They were there to stay. John and Rebecca would never leave the friendly northern town.